everyone, I'm your host Pensyfan19 and welcome to the January 2023 Pensyfan Periodical. This is a monthly news series which covers most of the major railroading headlines from around the world, as well as my opinions on them. We have a lot of articles to go over today, so with that in mind, let's get rolling. First off, Amtrak is continuing to revamp their fleet on all fronts, as they recently released a request for proposals to replace their existing long-distance fleet, including Viewliners, Amfleet 2s, and Superliners. After decades of reliable service, Amtrak is continuing to embrace its rebranding by requesting new equipment for the last of their passenger lines to be upgraded, the long-distance routes. This is the first of many steps that Amtrak will undertake to eventually replace these rail cars, as they still need to receive various proposals from multiple companies, most likely from Siemens, Stadler, Alstom, or Kawasaki. Just days after this announcement, Via Rail also announced plans to replace their long-distance fleet as well, specifically to replace their venerable 1950s Spud coaches used everywhere outside the Toronto to Montreal corridor. With the beginning of this LD fleet replacement process comes a wide variety of questions for the railroad, including whether these replacement cars will be single-level, bi-level, or both depending on the route, with arguments being made in favor of both heights. Likewise, there's also the question of whether these cars will be based on an existing bi-level design, or if they'll be an entirely new concept that will be utilized on other railroads. I personally prefer the use of single-level cars so that these trains can be longer for more passengers, or at least utilize bi-level cars that can utilize at least 4/5 of the lower level, instead of only half like the Superliners. Although, one slight annoyance I have with this story in particular is how non-American news outlets display the news, specifically by calling the long-distance routes overnight trains. I don't feel this is a correct description of these routes since they serve multiple communities that, let's be honest, pretty much any time of the day depending on how much freight roads delay them, and that the title neglects to recognize the lack of frequent passenger service in the region, as if overnight service is a simple addition to existing hourly service. Despite multiple criticisms of these routes being infrequent and slow, the fact that Amtrak is still continuing to invest in them is a good sign for not only these routes, but for the rest of Amtrak as well. Speaking of which, here is some interesting news. Indian Railways has ordered 1,200 electric engines from Siemens with 9,000 horsepower, while they're also creating their own electric-powered steam engine mock-up pending their entire network's electrification, which means this electric engine sadly has no steam engine components and only looks like a steam engine. Hitachi released a study claiming that better public transit connections result in less car usage. CNN Markets has listed greed as a driving force of the US market, and MBTA is to return their Hawker-Siddeley subways back into service on the Orange Line due to the unreliability of the CRRC cars. Now here's the follow-up news section for articles covering stories from previous episodes. Le Train has revealed designs for their Talgo HSTs. I must say this is literally the train of all time. Eurostar has released a new logo after acquiring Thales. Sir Nigel Gresley has been painted back in the BR blue. Veramus Rail has commenced operations with Class 321 EMUs hauling freight. Moravia EMUs have entered service on JMK. Indian Railways is to continue developing their hydrogen-powered locomotive. And the MTA selected the elevated light rail option for an inter-railroad express, thus being the first example of a light rail in New York City. This final decision has many mixed reviews, but I'm glad that it'll at least have some room for freight service below to add a second track. Regarding new stations, the Long Elm Road has opened their long-awaited east side access to Grand Central Terminal. I also got a little bit of footage of this station, but I didn't transfer the video files in time, so I'll just post these few pictures for now. Banksu Grand Station has opened for revenue service. Work has started on Cardiff Bay, and designs have been released for Newport News, Virginia, and Central Alameda. In other news, Marco Polo Rail is to make DMUs for F Trens de Chile. Argyle Verkehr has ordered the Stadler ABE 4-8. Metro is to consider expanding their UP West line to DeKalb, Illinois, while Tampa Bay commuter rail proposal has been cancelled. Sweden has abandoned plans for full-fledged high-speed rail in favor of upgrading conventional lines. CRRC has now released their own hydrogen-powered multiple unit, quite lame to the game when compared to other manufacturers. Tyne & Wear Metro has placed their Class 777 into service, while the Class DT1 has been retired in Nuremberg. A Southwestern Class 153 is to be converted into a cafe. Union Pacific 4420 and 428 are to be restored. Great Northern 599 is to be a parts unit to restore 598, and the Inland Northwest Railroad Museum has acquired SPNS F7 number 804. Also, congratulations to Lumo for winning Best Overall Operator at the World Passenger Awards. Happy 40th anniversary to the passenger operations of Metro North, New Jersey Transit, and Swedish name that I'm not going to attempt to pronounce, and happy 160th anniversary to the London Underground, with the occasion even earning recognition from Microsoft as it appeared on all computers for the day. After all that, it is now time for this month's Meme of the Month. This month's Meme of the Month is finishing the SP electrification program. And now, the top story of the January 2023 Pensyfan Periodical is Genesee and Wyoming versus the EPA. There has been a lot of developing news for this surprising story, but basically GNW is forced to either scrap or rebuild a whopping 88 of their engines across the country. Technically, this story goes all the way back to 2018, when the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, ordered GNW and its affiliate railroads to upgrade 11 of their 885 locomotives to Tier 3 or Tier 4 emission standards due to the presence of nitrogen oxide and other fine particulate matter emissions that are 300 times worse than CO2. However, Genesee and Wyoming ignored this order for 5 years while not obtaining grandfather clause or maintenance documentation for any of these engines, which resulted in the EPA to further litigate with the Short Line Holding Company until they eventually reached a settlement that included the replacement of the prime movers of over 80 already compliant engines, in addition to a $1.35 million fine as a penalty, while investing $42 million on replacement engines. There's been a lot of mixed reactions about this next part, but the legal wording suggests that GNW has to either scrap every engine listed on the 88 loco long list, or most importantly, to rebuild them with Tier 3 or higher prime movers, just as long as the original prime movers are removed, without the option of donating them to a museum, which also concerned a lot of rail fans. Oddly enough, news of the promising option to properly rebuild these engines seems to have been recognized a full day after the initial claims of scrapping were mentioned, but whatever happens now is entirely in the hands of Genesee and Wyoming, as the EPA is giving them the option to simply keep the existing locomotives, this time with compliant prime movers. Although, it seems that this immediate scrapping or rebuilding of these engines will be determined on a case-by-case basis relatively soon, in which some roads might find it cheaper to replace the engine with a brand new locomotive than to rebuild it. Given the sudden news of this emissions-related article, many people saw this as an opportunity to trash talk the EPA and describe them as the same villains from the Simpsons movie. I for one do not support such claims, as the EPA exists for a reason. That being in order to ensure livable conditions regarding water treatment, factory and car emissions, and plenty of other subdivisions that many people take for granted so that everyone stays healthy. I'm not going to call the entire organization bad just because the Short Line Company failed to upgrade some of their own engines that would have made the rail industry cleaner. Obviously, trains are inherently more efficient than other forms of transport by moving multiple units of goods when compared to a single unit like cars and trucks, and although I prefer any form of train, even steam engines, over any form of car, it's still good for railroads to follow environmental standards as well, so this way they can further contribute to removing greenhouse gases and making the world a more sustainable and efficient place. Thank you everyone for watching this month's episode of the Pensyfan Periodical. There have been a lot of rail news headlines for the month, and it will be very interesting to see what the future has in store for all of these articles. Thank you again for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Have a good day.